Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to our discussion on a topic that I think has certainly been explored over the years, but with some of the advances in data science, process mining, and artificial intelligence that are really starting to take hold, I think the topic has taken on a new meaning. And that topic is about how core operations can really power innovation and outcomes across the payer enterprise. My name is Mike Haveney. And at Accenture, I lead a lot of the work that we do in our core operations space. And generally speaking, those are the functions like benefit admin, enrollment and billing, claims, provider management. And what we really want to talk about today is how can we take advantage of all of the data, the insights, and really the know-how to help drive innovation across the enterprise. I'm going to set a little context for our discussion today, and then I'm going to introduce a panel and talk about how the industry is really addressing some of these challenges. So a little bit of context. Last year, Accenture ran a survey among payer operations executives, and we asked them about what are driving some of their priorities in the world today, and what do they see coming up in the future? And we're a little bit surprised in that we started to see an advancement and really an acceleration of something that we've seen in years past, where payer operations execs are moving not necessarily away from some of their traditional value drivers like cost containment, driving down PMPM, driving up efficiencies, but adding on to that traditional set of priorities, and really starting to look at things like, what does it mean to help fulfill experience goals in the enterprise? What does it mean to partner more effectively with clinical partners and help to drive outcomes? And we see that a lot of these market forces that are driving broad changes in the industry are starting to really grab hold in payer operations. For example, the number one thing that's on the top of a lot of our payer operation clients' minds is around experience, and how can we start to influence experience, not just in the front office, but from the back office? What are the things that can be changed? Where can we innovate to help power the member experience, the provider experience, the employer experience? And when we asked payer operations execs, what do they think they need to do about that? Where are they really prioritizing their investments in new capabilities? We heard a lot about being able to take advantage of the assets that sit in operations. And so what does it mean to be able to drive advancement in using things like data and analytics to drive insights so that we understand the member experience throughout the entire member journey? What does it mean to create new and different types of talents that actually sit in operations so that we've got the competencies and the skills to be able to take advantage of the assets that exist today, but also to grow new assets over time to help with those enterprise priorities. And finally, we asked, where are you really looking to drive change? And a lot of it's in this notion of intelligent tools. So what does it mean to create intelligence in operations so that we can take advantage of big data? We can take advantage of moving the needle from some of the basic AI use cases that are out there today and start to really take advantage of some of the things that can help us to drive innovation and change across the enterprise. And that also means changing some of the ways in which we work, not only breaking down functional silos within an enterprise, but also looking at the broader ecosystem and expanding the types of partnerships that perhaps are available not just in the front office and in the middle office, but really in that sort of core ops back office area too. And so the core thesis of our session and what we want to talk a little bit about today is this notion that core operations areas really need to infuse these sets of intelligent tools, these new intelligent ways of working in order for the broad enterprise to meet member engagement, clinical outcome, and other market goals. And to do that, we've got a great panel today. So I'd like to introduce Brian Lobley, who's the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Independence Health Group, the corporate entity for Independence Blue Cross out of Philadelphia, and my colleague, Megan Vesely, who's a Managing Director in our healthcare practice, who does a lot of work in the core ops space across her client portfolio. Brian, Megan, welcome. I'm looking forward to the discussion. So we've got 3 topic areas that we kind of wanted to talk to explore today, and we'll kind of work through each one by one. The first is about what are these outside-in market pressures that payer ops are feeling. So what is driving this notion that operations has urgency and a burning platform to change? Second is go a little bit deeper in what sort of capabilities, Brian and Megan, you're seeing to address that burning platform. And then lastly, what does this mean to operations? So what does this mean to the ways in which we work, to the people that are in operations, and how we think about changing the operating model to address these market themes? So just starting off on that first one, when we asked what's really driving disruption in operations, it was really interesting. The leaders that we talked to said they're really being hit by all angles. New reimbursement models, new companies that are trying to disrupt the healthcare landscape, and certainly not forgetting that sort of constant drumbeat for higher productivity. And all of this, of course, not to mention things like COVID and the realization that some of our operations leaders needed to start to become both more agile and more resilient at the same time over the last year. And so what I'd really like to hear from Brian, maybe we'll start with you, but what are you seeing in terms of when you think about your operations organization and what you're hearing from your leaders on that team about what are they being asked to do, and what is really driving imperatives in their organization when you look at sort of some of these themes we're seeing in the market that are pretty broad and powerful in nature?
Yeah, Mike, I think first, pleasure to be here, but I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's from all angles, right? So what are they being asked to do? Traditionally, ops was seen as commodities, right? So unit cost measurement, right? Kind of, manage my widget, kind of keep lowering my costs, figure out all different levers I can kind of pull to get my cost to serve down. And what's happened is in other industries, right, this experience expectation has completely kind of changed the dynamic, right? Think about any other products and services business that you're in, the value that you're paying for is really kind of holistically, right? So you're looking at the experience around your purchase, you're looking about the experience for using your purchase. Well, guess what, right? Everybody's applying that to healthcare now. And they're saying, hey, wait a minute. If the retail segment, can change and financial services can change and, other insurance models, why can't my health insurance as well? So I think, as I look at my ops team, right, I'm putting more demands on them to meet the experience side of the business, right? So first call resolution, major focus area for health insurers now, right? Get it right the first time. What is our business wrought with? Complexity, right? Nobody understands the insurance business. We've made our business hard to understand for our consumers. So what have we said to our ops teams? Hey, make it more simple to understand the business. Well, the comeback of that is, well, wait a minute, you were driving me down to a unit cost basis. Kind of help me understand that. And I said, well, now you're a source of value, right? So now you're part of the value equation, right? So when we go out in front of customers and try to say, hey, Independence Blue Cross is the best product for you, or our AmeriHealth product suite is the best product for you. It's not just a price equation anymore. It's everything that surrounds it. So it's how we interface with your provider. So that's getting into your kind of value-based kind of arrangements, right? You talk about reimbursement models. Ops has to explain that, right? So why is it a differential cost basis for a site of service MRI? Why is it cheaper to go to a standalone center than, an in-hospital basis? Well, that's kind of the experience of your benefit. Certainly as you think about kind of the non-traditionals, right? Why should I choose IBC over disruptor A, B, or C? Or why is AmeriHealth and the ACA market doing, so well in New Jersey? Because we are the hometown and it's localized, right? So we're now competing against a lot of these external entities that are coming in experience first, right? That's what a lot of the competitors are selling on. And then you mentioned it kind of in your intro there around data. Easy for me to say, being a longtime payer guy and a payer exec for a while, that data is this untapped kind of source in healthcare, right? Yet it's been around us forever, right? We've always been using data to figure out pre-auths and, marrying claim data with clinical data, et cetera. Well, now it's this notion of pushing that back to the patient, right? Next best action. We're getting into that notion, right? Guided journeys using AI to lower the cost to serve or to get a patient to the right place, et cetera. So, you're exactly right. It's being hit from all sizes. And I would say, I have the benefit of ops being under me plus all the P&L. So I can get kind of everyone talking about, the entire organization needing to move in this concept of think of health insurance as a products and services business. And, I tell everybody in our company, whether, you work for me or not, or, the provider team and our chief medical officer, I'm like, look, we're in the products and services business. We have to create brand loyalty beyond the unit costs, right? It's everything that comes around it. So it sounds like maybe a little bit of a cop-out answer, but as I look at your slide here, it's 40% and above, right? I mean, these are big numbers, right? Which means it is kind of spreading across everything. And what we're trying to do is say, hey, in the commodity space, absolutely lower that cost, but then make sure everything else is accretive value so that we can sell that value back to our customers, our employer groups, or the federal government for that matter.
Yeah, I think that last point is really important, and it makes me think of one of the first things you said, which is the expectation of your customers, of your members, your employer groups, and they're associating it to the experience that they have, whether it's in banking or in retail or in other settings. And Megan, I think this is something that we're certainly seeing in terms of customer demands and what they're asking for, and how that really resonates or reverberates into operations.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Brian, I know you're seeing some of this dynamic in your business with employer groups who are taking a much more active role in managing the physical and mental health of their employees. And in doing so, really raising the expectations of the health plan. Some just examples, right? Some of the custom benefit designs that enable a much more flexible, sophisticated way to access healthcare. But as any operations executive will tell you, introduce a lot of complexity in the back office, not just in installing those benefits, but in claims and COB and calls, really all over the place. I know that there have been customers that have started to increase the amount of transparency they're getting into the experience that you're delivering for your members, right? So not just the traditional performance guarantees that are oriented around efficiency, turnaround times, but really seeking to understand net promoter scores for their members. And those expectations are, in some ways very much in conflict with some of the other expectations around efficiency gains and cost pressures. So totally agree. Operations execs are getting hit from all angles.
Well, you mentioned transparency, Megan, and it made me think too. I mean, obviously, with some of the new mandates that are coming out and how organizations are trying to rally around those, they have a distinctive impact in ops to be able to expose pricing data, to be able to do some of the pricing and liability transparency initiatives that are being requested. But similarly, there's now going to be an expectation, right? A customer expectation, an employer expectation, a provider expectation about what this information looks like, and add that to the list of things that are driving change on the page here.
Yeah, get it right, make it easy, right? That's an imperative on just about anything.
Right.
Megan brings up such a great point, though, right? When you build all of this, great innovation, right? It comes at a cost, right? And then we have to make sure that cost basis can be absorbed the right way, right? And then that's why you still see the increasing productivity and decreasing administrative costs on there. It's not going to go away, right? Because if you're spending over here, it's a balloon, right? It's popping on the other side, right? So, in kind of my view of it, right, it's actually raised the bar for the expectation of a pure ops leader, right? It's a much more sophisticated operations leader who is not, again, in the kind of olden days, pre-scale curve, right? Everyone was saying, all right, I gotta hit a scale curve to get this widget cheaper. Well, now that executive has got to think all encompassing and say, okay, how can I glean out enough productivity here, right? Because my spend's going to be going up, right? Biggest complaint in healthcare is still cost, right? So it still comes back to cost, right? And we still have 67% of our business is self-insured now, right? So we're selling the value side of how we manage medical costs, the value side of our provider kind of network. But at the end of the day, they're still looking at a fixed fee from an admin basis. And they're saying, well, wait a minute, still got to go down, right? I mean, admin's got to go down if I'm measuring that. So it has also, changed the bar on what the expectation and the candidate has to be kind of an operations leader. So it's kind of another dynamic there, because they can't lose sight of that, unit cost basis. That 46% is never going to drop below 40, at least not in my career. So it's still going to be there.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a potentially good transition into, so what do we do about it? So when we think about what we're investing in, and we think about what does it mean to drive innovation, what are those things, and how does the market, at least now, view priorities in terms of innovation? And as I mentioned, I mean, what we heard overwhelmingly was it's this notion of do more by understanding what you have, right? Understanding the data and the power of that data, being able to drive insights with it. With capabilities like driving more effective artificial intelligence, more effective intelligent automation, more effective ecosystem partnerships. And what does it mean to really make decisions around partnering versus growing some of these innovations in-house? Those were things that were at the top of executives' minds. And I think it goes to your point around, if we're growing our innovation side of that balloon, how do we do it in a way in which we're still addressing the cost curve, and we're still driving some outcomes that are core to running just a smooth operation shop?
Yeah, I think if you looked at your last three here, right? So working closely with ecosystem partners, your people skills, and kind of RPA, those are still going to be really focused from a cost reduction lever, right? So that's making sure you continue to enhance your business model, your processes, and make them as efficient as possible, right? Healthcare has not reached our efficiency curve yet, right? On operations and widget management, whatever you want to call it, right? Still a lot of technology to be applied. So I think you're kind of seeing that. And again, still, overwhelming in that, over 50%. You move to the far left here, and I think that's where I bring back that notion of products and services, right? So I almost look at these as the monetization side of it, right? So if you think about big data management, and how do we apply our data more efficiently, right? At first, that could be a cost, right? That could be something getting into, a patient kind of cohort, right? By segmenting patients the right way, using data to do that, and then you're applying your action on that data, right? And then that's where you're going to drive more efficiency on your total cost. So that brings it back to the products and services side, where you can say, yeah, my core admin is going down, but now I'm applying all of this additional information, additional informatics at play to actually impact your total cost of care. So that's where we try to flip the conversation back with customers. That's members, that's self-insured employers, that's the government, saying at the end of the day, we really want people to look at the total cost of care. And our objective is to always increase quality, but lower that total cost of care. So you're going to have those trade-offs conversations. So I look at this and I love it's kind of the so what, right? Gets back to the point we made. So what? Do it all, but do it in a way on the left-hand side that you're showing me, right? And a lot of times what we're doing, right, is we're putting those fees at risk, right? We're saying, yes, we believe in this fee because it's going to drive, again, that total cost of care down. And then we're going to continue, in almost kind of a center of excellence model in those last three, right? To really still focus on the cost. You can't lose sight of it. You need, again, that multidimensional thinker. But I do think you're hearing a lot of, again, other industry polls come through in those first two bars, and Megan knows all too well. Has been doing great work. I would say, Megan, we do a lot of work with Accenture on the bookends here, right? Still a lot of RPA focus and kind of getting out costs, but then back on this big data side, you're working across in my organization with my marketing team and my ops team and the clinical team, and kind of putting it all together to productize some things for us.
Yeah, great points, Brian. And I think the theme here in the research, and Brian, and what you said, you really can't meet the new expectations and, achieve what, customers, members are looking for without technology and advanced analytics. I'll maybe share a couple of use cases just to kind of bring this to life. Some of what, Mike and I are seeing in our day-to-day with clients. Brian, some of this I know you guys are exploring in your organization. But the use of artificial intelligence to identify sources of and eliminate waste in the system. I think we can all acknowledge that there is a ton of administrative waste that still exists in the system. And certainly there have been process improvement initiatives to address some of that, for decades. But I think some of the new emerging technologies really unlock the ability to attack that in a different way, to apply really advanced analytics to understand why members are calling, and not only understand why, but also contextualize those calls with other operational data. To understand how you can make adjustments in your upstream process to eliminate the need for the member to call in the first place. Brian, I know you mentioned earlier on, chatbots and artificial intelligence to improve the member experience. We're seeing a lot of customers start to explore conversational UI, not just as a means to deflect calls, but really to orchestrate that experience, to understand what a member is looking for, and drive the next best action that is personalized based on who that member is and what they need.
Yeah, there's really that expectation hit there around self-service as well, right? So we're really across all segments. We're seeing it from seniors down to the newest generation of insurance purchasers, right? Their expectation has been raised in other industries. I mean, we all do it, right? We're like, well, over here, I'm able to do X, right? But it goes back to, you need to have kind of that full continuum, right? Someone that's, in a more chronic or serious care condition, right, needs to be able to have the empathetic voice on the other end, but that empathetic voice needs the same data as someone that is, for me, right, don't waste the 20 minutes on a phone call with me, right? Give me a chat, give me a technology resource to do it and get me on my way. So it is really, I think we're at the, COVID has accelerated, right? It's accelerated the expectation of convenience, right? We all want information, now. So I think your point there, Megan, about the chatbots, et cetera, it is applicable to that segment of self-service users, but really the infrastructure behind it is really powering everything, right? So we then have to enable that back up to a customer service agent. And by the way, then that's probably a more sophisticated customer service agent than we had 5 years ago, who was answering a pretty specific benefits or claims question. Right now, it's more complicated in a navigation and outcomes-based conversation. So I think AI is going to play a huge role there.
Absolutely, which gets to the point of reskilling, right? In order to redeploy the resources that you have, you've got to both train them in technology and what we refer to as digital fluency, but also make sure that they've got some of those emotional skills to handle the more complex and more emotionally charged interactions with your customers.
And I know we're talking about customer engagement and scenarios in either service inquiry or clinical inquiry, but just thinking about the ops perspective, that same upskill, right? That same ability to drive the contextualization now needs to sit in ops, because in order to make those connections, someone who knows claims needs to be able to facilitate that connection so that the right frontline resources and agents and others can easily be armed with that information, right? Or can support a new technology, whether it's a chatbot or some other self-service, in order to make sure that experience for the member or perhaps the provider is meeting the expectation and providing the right information. And so this notion of being able to drive contextualization from ops and out, I think, is something that we're seeing and hearing a lot about.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, the definition of operations, maybe beyond the executive role I talked about earlier, you're right, it's completely different, right? So, we've had, I'll call it like the accordion approach on operating model, right? Is it centralization and put kind of RPA in one place, and it's the 10 years ago project managers, right? Do you consolidate everybody and have them resources out, or, do you embed them throughout the organizations? I think we're hitting the same thing here. And by the way, there's, probably both answers are right. But I think long-term, again, moving operations as a value lever means build those skill sets within ops, right? So maybe you're not having the data scientist. Maybe that person is, to your point, Mike, sitting in informatics, right? But the user of the information coming out is in operations, right? And then deploying that across the service line. So it's, to Megan's point, right, that brings in this notion of reskilling, because you still want that expertise of someone that has an inherent, if it's claims, an inherent claims knowledge. If it's, by the way, benefits, great point there. The complexity of benefits is ever expansive, right? That's the whole carve out world. That's my favorite conversation. Hey, we're going to carve that out and do all this. And it's like, okay, that adds money, right? Because you're now putting, I got to send this data that way and this data that way. Oh, but it's data. We have the data, right? That's why I think payers today are responding by building our own products and services, because we believe we have the data already, right? Get the EMR data from all my providers, get the clinical data from my claims, right? Have informatics kind of do the algorithms, right? And then empower the operations team. So, little anti-carve out conversation there, but that's why I think it comes back to the ability to do it within. It's not going away, but I think you're seeing payers build, I'll call it complementary services, right? There are certainly back to the admin pressures, right? There are things that in the ecosystem partners, we're going to find the right partners that do it well and do it well in partnership. And I would say in that vein, partnership is a capital P, because we both have to be invested in lowering total costs, even if that's going to be an administrative expense for us. But Mike, to your point, how we got off on this, it is, those different skills coming into your operations team. We're moving down in our ops group to create, a group that's really focused as a center of excellence on driving products and services out, right? Versus, just having an enrollment department, a claims department, a customer service. We're saying, yeah, we have kind of production, right? And then you have kind of the COE model that's really focused on value levers throughout and working with partners, whether it's Accenture or, some of the other solutions and services that we partner with to lower cost.
Well, and I think that's a great segue into the third topic that we wanted to explore, which is, well, what is the impact? Because I think this notion of whether it's, how do you partner with a data and analytics or an informatics team that might sit in might sit in IT, or do you start to embed some of these skills and operations? Those are sort of the operating model decisions, but the themes that we're hearing from the market, I think, are consistent, which is operations needs to move away from, your point, Brian, a traditional sort of just administrative cost center to a collaboration engine in the enterprise, right? And so we just captured some of the things that we heard in this survey from operational executives around what does it mean to move from, efficiency to balancing that with the priorities of experience. Obviously, the notion of moving from sort of traditional RPA on the right-hand side of the previous screen to really intelligent solutions on the left-hand side of the previous screen or previous slide. And then this notion of really getting from operational reporting to being an insight engine, which then powers this notion of collaboration across the enterprise. And I think this idea of embedding that and then feeding it out is certainly a theme that a lot of industry folks are talking about and starting to try to grapple with, like, well, how do we do this? How do we actually start to substantiate this and move the needle on it? And it sounds like, Brian, you started that journey a little bit with some center of excellence concepts. And I don't know if you've got a few thoughts or point of view on some of the other ways that IBC might be tackling this right now, and obviously Megan on what you're seeing in your portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, these are so spot on because each of them, kind of, roll together and reinforce the others, right? So this notion of experience, I think we talked a lot about, right? We want to be held to a standard of experience or else we won't be successful. So at the end of the day, what we try to articulate to really anybody, right? At the sense of the provider operations team, so much as it does, we've spent so much time focusing on, the employer and the member. I mean, the fact of the matter is, right, some of our biggest stakeholders actually are providers, right? So we have to make sure that we've enabled a positive experience for our providers, because they're having some of the biggest, well, the arguably biggest impact on our members, right? So they're also can have the most negative impact, right? Bad experience there on our provider side, providers are going to look for redirection. So I think this notion of experience goes without saying, and it does kind of come back to, even if we take our own selves, right, we have repeatability with brands, whether it's, whatever, right, clothes, technology, media, right? There's repeatability because the experience has been great for you. So I think it took a while for us to realize that kind of health insurance needed to move that way. But I would say that's an industry, standard now, right? Almost every year the bar is being raised and raised and raised. So I think then, how do you get at that? And I think it hits your third bullet here, which is this enterprise collaboration, accountability. I think all of us, right? Anybody in my role, anybody in a pure ops role is looking at operating model, right? And then figuring out, okay, to your point, like what is the right operating model? What does ops need to have? And how does it interface out? So, I'm an engineer by background, right? So I'm like a process person at my heart. So I'm always believing kind of there's something coming in, right? You're always receiving an input, right? And then you're kind of doing something with that and you're an output. Well, so when you're in an ops world, you're in the same kind of, so what's the data in, or what's the translation in? What's my handoff in and what's my handoff out? Well, wait, if I take a step back, well, maybe what I'm getting handed in, well, maybe I can move upstream a little bit, right? Or what I'm handing out, maybe I can move downstream a little bit. So I do think operating model, as you move into this experience business, and the last one on this predictive insight and analytics, really does force you to take a step back. Last point is why we drove into kind of a COE model, right? Let's have kind of the operations team, the people that know the data the best, right? Know the processing core pieces of our business the best, right? Sitting there and making the improvements, right? So, what's one of the worst things we have to deal with, right? Kind of adjustments, right? You got to get it right the first time, right? Getting things from post-pay to prepay, right? That's applying intelligence, right? That's applying kind of this better experience to get it right for the patient the first time, or get it right for the provider the first time, so it's not coming through. So, I think it is kind of operating model at this kind of holistic level. And then it's really making sure your operations executives understand, in our world, right, which we call kind of our total PMPM, right? Even if they are only owning or directly accountable for, say, 60 or 50 to 60% of that PMPM, right? Understand where the rest of that's coming from. And then how can they make an impact? Because in most cases, the last stop is ops. Sometimes it's the first stop, benefits and enrollment, the last stop on claims. There's a lot of stuff that happens in between. It's not much that happens after, right? So I think that's creating this operations executive or leadership team, right, that has all of these different relationships in understanding the provider side of the business, understanding medical management, understanding audit, right, recoveries. So I do think that is a lot to say on this slide. I think it's really captured succinctly in those four buckets you have on the towards, and I would almost change that from previous to today. It's not where we're going. I think it's the expectation now, and I think it's only going to improve and only going to get better. But it's not a tomorrow thing. It's an expectation today.
Yeah, Brian, I completely agree. And I mean, just to tie back to kind of where we started the discussion, the expectations used to be all about efficiency and cost. And so operations organizations organize based on the work, right? The age-old assembly line model, where everyone has their part. And then to your point, it gets handed off down the assembly line. And now that the expectations have changed and operations executives are responsible for delivering on a much broader set of outcomes that still include efficiency and cost, but also include experience, also include things like enabling new and more innovative products and services. They really have to think about organizing differently now, whether that's structurally centralizing resources or figuring out better ways to break down those silos and collaborate across the enterprise. Those changing expectations, again, very much influence how operations need to rethink how they're organized around work.
Yeah, Megan, the metrics piece is great, right? Think about stars, right? If you think about the Medicare business and stars having such a major component of a payer's business model. It used to be that, you know, your government business line, if your Medicare group, right, owned stars because they were looking at, you know, what's the makeup of it, right? HEDIS measures and how you're measuring clinical outcomes. Yeah, absolutely, right? Still critically important because that measures the, you know, the impact you're having on the health or the improvement of the health of the member. But more and more, you know, it's like impact surveys, right? So providers are getting experience surveys and saying, here's how they or members, how they thought about the health plan, right? So that puts that customer service agent front and center. How do they handle the provider inquiry on behalf of a member for a pre-auth? How do they handle the member inquiry on what's covered and not covered? How did you handle the member inquiry on where can I get services? Most importantly, how did I handle the inquiry on how much something's going to cost? Right. So that's now very different because now you could look to the operations team and I could look to my operations team and say part of that stars bonus, right, getting that 4-star achievement, is an accountability for you as well. Right. So, you know, we've talked so much in this conversation about the execution arm of operations. There's also the ideation, right? Because they're seeing things first, right? So, you know, applying innovation, yes, right? But identifying the opportunities for improvement, yes. I mean, maybe that's something else, Mike, as I think about this slide, right? Is, you know, from reactive, right, to proactive, right? I think that's another dynamic that the expectation is, and that's not, you know, ops leader down, right? But I would say bottoms up as well, right? Most times you're hearing the pain points bottoms up, right? And how you react accordingly and then say, hey, to a, you know, someone in the customer service, right? You're having an impact on, you know, a 4-star rating, right? Let's tie back your work effort, you know, to that financial outcome for the plan. So I think that's another dynamic. I think, Megan, you kind of hit the nail on the head. It just, you know, as I was thinking about this conversation, I wasn't translating that, but you prompted that right away.
Now, what does continuous improvement in ops really mean? Because it might not just mean, you know, reducing a certain type of claim pend. It might mean continuous improvement of the experience, continuous improvement in the clinical space, continuous improvement in customer service, and yeah, how do you embed that into your traditional ops area? That, for all the reasons you're both listing, you know, a critical competency that the payers need to think about when they think about this notion of addressing operations change because of all the reasons we've been talking about.
Yeah, you need a brave executive too, right? Brave leadership to say, hey, I gotta, in a continuous improvement area, I got to continue to think of ways to put myself out of business, right? I mean, that's almost a mindset you need. That's how you really get true, you know, breakthrough thinking, right? That's beyond incremental innovation, right? That's you know, that's the transformational innovation. And, you know, where are we heading in healthcare, right? I think we're heading to that space anyway. And look, I think a lot of that's coming from the outside industry taking on the incumbents and saying, hey, there has to be a better way. You know, I think in many cases they're right? In many cases, they don't understand necessarily how to manage risk, right? As I think that's what we've been doing for so long. We understand how to manage risk and, you know, how to manage medical spend. But I think we've been forced, appropriately so, to up our game, you know, on that experience side and that innovation side. So yeah, it's a really interesting time, right? I don't think we've seen nearly what the end's going to be look like. And I think if the three of us like put a little note bottle in the or a note in the bottle and toss it out to sea and it came back in 5 years, I mean, maybe you guys will be right, I'll probably be wrong, but it'll be interesting to see nonetheless.
You can place bets, what we could say.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think this has been really interesting. I think it's really clear that those core ops areas are going through a lot of change. We're obviously hearing it in the market. Brian, you're obviously experiencing it in your role and at your organization. And I think, you know, Megan, clearly you and I are seeing it in our day-to-day client interactions as well. So as I just kind of work to wrap us up here, I'll ask any last comments or comments. And maybe just ask both of you in your closing a little bit about the people too. We've talked about new capabilities, new center of excellence. Obviously, this is going to have an impact on the folks that sit in ops. And when I think about it, I think about a lot of opportunity for folks to understand new skills, how to apply those when it comes to data and analytics, and helping that organization with continuous improvement, and where they can help the enterprise in a material way.
Yeah, maybe I'll kind of do that and give you one kind of closing thought. I think on the people side, I think it's a dichotomy, right? I think certainly on the people that are in there today, there's an tremendous expectation and opportunity for them to change, right? So there's almost the iceberg melting there, right? So kind of change before change happens to you. So I think it's a great opportunity for talented individuals to use their skill set, learn something new and apply, and really be the expert in transformation. I think on the second side, as maybe it opens up potential as kind of new hires come into the workforce for a kind of health payer operations to be a place to go innovate, right? Because it's probably not historically been the thinking, right? So now I think it's a different area to sell, right? So I think that's exciting. Yeah, right. It's cool, right? A different pitch there. So I think from that standpoint, it's all about the people. I mean, it's the culture that you create, and the culture of accountability and the culture of opportunity. I think that's what we try to do at Independence, and I think that's going to play through. I think the closing comment I would leave you on this conversation is, maybe back to where I started is, in order for us to be successful, I'll speak for us, for Independence, I think it's imperative that we embrace the notion of we are a products and services company, and therefore you have to look holistically around everything that makes it up, and cost as a basis and value as a basis. And if you think on those two continuums, the cost that you're providing your services and the value that you're providing for those services, I think you'd come pretty quickly to say, at the end of the day, we're not any different than like Procter and Gamble, right? So we have to reinvent the product every year to make sure it's compelling, right? It's attractive, right? And it's meeting the price for the market. So, I'm excited for what's to come, in this space, because I think we're in the up curve right now, right? So we're in the up curve for opportunity. So appreciate the time, Mike, and Megan, as always, great to see you. Give you the closing comment, though.
I mean, Brian, I completely agree with you. And Mike and I joked a little bit about, operations being cool this morning, but it really is an exciting time to be in operations. And Brian, you touched on it early on. At the end of the day, the business is still really complex, and that's probably not going to change anytime soon. And that complexity shows up in operations. So I think the fact that as you think about the people and the type of skills that's going to be required in the operations workforce going forward, it requires both folks that understand and know how to weed through that complexity, but also know how to innovate and think creatively about how to implement solutions that ensure that complexity doesn't negatively impact the experience or the cost base.
Yeah, well, great closing comments. Appreciate both your time. Like you both said, an exciting time, and I'm excited to be part of it. I know there's a lot of innovation happening out there in the market, and hopefully a lot of our other AHIP members are seeing that type of innovation at their organizations as well. Thanks again. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Megan.
Yeah.